Well,
Thanks. Good evening, everyone. I am Rachel Mori-Bidu, Chair of the Washington County Planning Commission. Today is Wednesday, April 16th, 2025, and this evening's meeting of the Planning Commission is called to order. May we have the roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Carlson,
Present.
Commissioner Fry,
present.
Commissioner Just,
Present.
Commissioner Rosenberry. I am not hearing Commissioner Rosenberry. And Commissioner Whips let us know that he would not be attending. Commissioner Will? Not here yet. Vice Chair Monteblanco?
Here.
And Chair Mori-Bidu?
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. May we have the director's report, please?
Thank you. Nice to see everyone this evening. We got a few updates. We are still recruiting for the vacancy on the Planning Commission. And while it's still open, we do have quite a few really solid applications, and staff are going to be interviewing those candidates later this week. But there still is an opportunity if anyone is interested to submit an application. And we'll be sharing updates at the next meeting. We'll should know some more about then, more about the situation at that point in time. In terms of kind of recent events, last Thursday we had our development forum here. And this is a semi-annual event that we hold to kind of meet both the development community as members of the community at large, kind of talk about improvements that we're making in our development review process. Primarily the focus is on building services and current planning development review. We had about just over 30 people in attendance, and it was kind of an even mix between people from the development industry. We had quite a few attendees from our kind of partner agencies and local cities, as well as members of the general public. And the topics of conversation were to highlight some of our technology changes. We are just implementing an online application process for the trade permits, so like building, plumbing, mechanical permits. And with time, we'll be rolling that out to the full building permit online application. We're also in the process of refining an online application process for the current planning applications, land use applications. We found kind of a mothballed online application that hadn't been pushed out to production yet, so we need to take a little a look at that, and we've been soliciting people that might be interested in serving as beta testers for that. So we are anticipating that's probably more of a 60-day timeline. We also reviewed our proposed fee increases. So we had not done fee increases for quite some time until the 2022-23 fiscal year. And so we had to do a very significant increase at that time. And there was kind of an agreement made with the board that we would be keeping a much closer eye on that and making incremental fee adjustments, and with a primary goal of stabilizing the reserve fund. The state Department of Building Codes recommends that we have about 12 to 18 months of revenue and reserves to deal with some of the vagaries of the development cycle, and we're not quite hitting that. So, and then we've got some one-time kind of costs to the county that are increasing our ability, or just the cost of providing services. The county has agreed to do a 6% PERS pickup for this year, and so that's having the significant effect. So overall, we're proposing an 8.5% increase across the board for both current planning as well as building services. And then because of our constraints around the general fund and being directed to look at some general fund reductions, we're proposing 2 new fees. It's a 0.004% fee on building permits with valuation to support our code compliance program, and a 0.04% increase, or excuse me, additional fee to support community planning. And that offsets what would otherwise be pretty significant general fund cuts to both of those programs. We also highlighted a new process for getting service provider letters when the county is actually the service provider, where we have developments oftentimes in a city that are accessing a county road. And so in order to streamline that process and improve coordination between that local jurisdiction, the county, and the applicant, the developer, we've developed, we're making use of a software program called Project Docs, and it's an online interface that, you know, creates tasks and improves the interaction between the applicant and the county and makes sure that everybody knows where they are in the process and can move that forward. So we're just about to launch that. Tony Mills on our staff is the point of contact for that process. And I think that more or less, and then some of the things that we'll be talking about today about the work program and the community development code assessment were also on that agenda. And then our next development forum will be in the fall, and that's going to be on October 9th. So we're asking people to mark their calendars for that. In terms of other events, Metro is asking the public to comment. They've got an online survey posted for the Regional Flexible Fund Allocation Step 2 grant funding. So those are for funding investments for things like sidewalks, trails, and roadways. And the comments are going to be accepted through April 30th. If you go to oregonmetro.gov, you can Google the RFFA process program, and you can get the link to that survey. And then one additional reminder about an upcoming event. We talked about this at our last meeting, that there is a county volunteer appreciation celebration next Thursday, the 24th at 5:30. It's at the Wingspan Event Center in Hillsborough. And if you're interested in attending, the RSVP deadline is tomorrow. And Todd has sent out an email with a link for you to provide your RSVP if you're interested in attending. And so then kicking off the rest of the meeting today, first we are going to have a presentation on public records training. Then we'll be reviewing our draft planning work program and finally discussing the community development code assessment project. So with that, I will turn it over to Jacqueline Saito.
Okay, good afternoon.
We can get Michael, do we have that presentation available?
I suppose we're getting into late evening. It's not an afternoon anymore, even though it's bright outside. So, so the purpose of this presentation is to give everyone here just kind of a basic understanding of public records. We're not going to do a deep dive into every exemption and, you know, how the county handles a request and all of the different, you know, ways that we have to figure out, like whether something is prohibited from disclosure or allowed to be disclosed. This really is a 10,000-foot view to familiarize folks here as to their obligations under the Oregon Public Records laws.
Before we jump into this, can we back up a little bit and ask if there are any questions on the director's report?
I did have one.
Oh, yes.
Just a quick question. With the online application for the building permits, mechanical permits, are we expecting that to reduce the time frame for that permitting? And then additionally, with the land use, when we eventually are able to roll out the land use online permitting, what are the time reductions for builders, developers? And then I guess what are you thinking that will create more efficiencies in your actual department?
Yeah, for the current online applications for the trades permit, what it does is the applicant provides all the data that currently the staff would have to hand enter. And so just removing that step eliminates the amount of setup time. So it does improve. Because we've just gone live, we don't have any good data about comparison between kind of pre-launch of OAS and the current timelines. But we're anticipating, you know, at least a day to 2 days of improvement on that. And then in terms of the current planning process, right now applications come in by paper and it's kind of an inefficient process. There's not, you know, and they come in so many multiple sources. It's really more about, you know, being more transparent when the applications come in taking them digitally will allow us to have a better quality set of documents for us to review. Right now, we're scanning documents that have been scanned, and so it makes it very difficult for staff, let alone the public, to be able to really see what's on a plan set for the current planning process. And then also we'll be having them in a digital format so that we can immediately post them online when we receive them. So that's really the primary intention on the current planning side, is to improve transparency for the public, but it will definitely save some time, so because they'll be getting into the queue and be able to get routed much faster.
Will you be monitoring that as it goes? I mean, I just think that that's a really nice point to talk about. You know, we talk about efficiency and time is money for developers and builders, and this will end up trickling down to affordability. So it would be really nice to be able to tell that story with some actual data when that rolls
Yeah,
out.
definitely. And as part of a much bigger kind of look at our permitting system, we've implemented Acela, we're going through an upgrade and migrating to the cloud. So we'll be, we're not even quite sure what our functionality is going to be, because we're doing 3 different upgrades. So that's going to take us quite a bit more modern version of Acela than what we're using right now. And what we're really hoping is that our reporting capabilities improve. Right now, we have to pull reports manually. They don't provide any kind of really analysis so that we can see easily how they're tracking with our target service levels. And ultimately, we'd like to get to a point similar to what the city of Portland has, where we've got a Tableau dashboard, so that it really simplifies the data and people can see immediately the impact of how many permits, how much time for each step of the workflow.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Next item is public communication. Is anyone signed up to speak on matters not on the agenda?
We have no one signed up to speak. Would anyone in the virtual audience like to speak to the commission on matters of public communication? I'm not seeing any hands.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now we have our work session.
Okay.
Over to you, Jacqueline. Thank you.
you. Okay, so as I mentioned previously, this isn't going to be like a big, long, deep dive into public records laws. And then I also need to let you know at the very beginning that this is not legal advice. So this is more along the lines of this is my perspective. This is kind of for discussion and to maybe educate you on some of the more applicable public records laws. And then I should also tell you that I am not your lawyer, even though I sit in here and I answer legal questions. If there is some issue that relates to your performance on the board, I'm not going to be the person to come and advise you on that. So I will just get that out into the open. Slide, please. Okay. So who is subject to the public records law? This would be everybody here in this room and on screen. The legislation is drafted to pretty much capture everybody who is working in or volunteering in any capacity related to local government or government. I did some legislative history a couple years ago, and the genesis for the public records law was back when President Nixon, there was Watergate, and there was this big concern in the public about, what is the government doing and why are they doing things? And so we followed California's like sunshine laws related to records being available for public inspection. So that's kind of the genesis of it. And where we are now is literally everything that we create in our service to the government is a public record, unless it is accepted by like a big long laundry list of things that are exempt, unless there is a public, like a really good public policy reason to release it. And I put under their private bodies about functional equivalent of public body. This is just a question, like I don't have the answer to it, but it is very interesting if you have something that is like a private body, but it still has certain public features, like it's supported by the state. So when I think of the private body that's a functional equivalent, I'm thinking of OHSU. So, are they subject to it? So I haven't looked to see if they are or aren't, but you don't, sometimes you will run into bodies that are a little bit of both. And then so does the public records law cover them, or do they not? Does it not? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so when the legislature was drafting the language for what types of records would be covered, they really wrote something very expansive, and it was meant to capture everything. And so the definition is on your left, what is a public record? And then on the right is a writing includes. And then over time, as I've been here, I've seen more things get captured into what is a writing as technology advances. So, 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, what's a text? What's a chat message? Like nobody would have known what that was. But over time, these sorts of things fall within the definition. And I think the definition of a public record is purposely expansive so that over time, as things develop, it captures these things without having to go back and fiddle with the definition of a public record. So I know y'all can read, but it's basically any writing, and it doesn't have to be like a writing like a language. It can be a photograph, it can be a map, it's a symbol of things. It can be a voicemail message if that's kept, and can be transcribed. But at this point, it is not a live telephone conversation. Like that is not a public record. You are not under any obligation to have to record anything if you're just having a telephone conversation. Okay, do we have any questions so far? No? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so who gets to inspect? Long before we had the Supreme Court case that determined that a corporation was a person for purposes of making public donations, the definition of person in Oregon for public records purposes did include corporate entities, agencies, partnerships, anything, you don't have to be just like a live person. It can be some other form. So a corporation can make a public records request. And the thing about the public records request is, the intent is not important. If somebody, like I've seen this a couple of times, like if we have litigation or it's before litigation, there'll be an attorney who will file a public records request, even though we're involved in litigation or we're going to be involved in litigation. So our litigators handle all of that. I've never had to work that out, but there are exceptions in the public records laws that took that into account. They could see that was going to happen, and so they weave out, that which you can get when you are doing your lawsuit. You don't need to do a public records request. So the two are supposed to be complementary, not one does not defeat the other. And if a person is interested, or a corporation or a media outlet, if all they want to do is embarrass somebody or shine some unflattering light on the committee or anything, like that's fine. That's fine, because the intent again is not important. It could be for anything. So sometimes it can be a little uncomfortable when you get a public records request and we retrieve all of these records and then we go through them, or sometimes I go through them myself, or a paralegal will go through the records. And most of the time it's fine, but sometimes there might be some comments that are kind of embarrassing, and we have to let those go because they're not protected. So just be mindful of what you write in your emails and how you communicate with each other. Questions? No? Okay. So next slide, please. Okay. So I'm not going to go into all of the exemptions. I'm just going to mention a handful of exemptions. So there's one in particular that's very enticing to media, and that is, let's say there is a decision to fire somebody or to hire somebody. and the media is very interested in knowing what the process was. What were the discussions between the staff and the people who make the decisions? You know, what was all of that? And they'd like to have those disclosed pursuant to a public records request. So back in the day, that used to be the purpose of having this particular exemption was to encourage like frank discussion amongst people who are involved in this decision. And back in the day, that was a pretty solid reason to keep those records out. But now it seems like that's not a very good reason to keep the records out. The public policy that encourages the disclosure of those records outweighs the interest that the government has in having these discussions. So it's just the way it is, how it's evolved over the years. Certain things that seem to be ironclad and never change are you cannot have a business's business secrets. You cannot have their customer lists and all of those sensitive documents related to a business. Another thing would be, very obviously, it would be records that are kept in that are related to health. So you don't often see that in LUT, but it did happen once, and it was for a family member to stay on property that you're not supposed to have additional dwellings, but it was a hardship exemption, and there was a lot of medical information in there. So when the request was made, I saw the file and we kept out all of the medical stuff. Every now and then I might see like a request for a file, like a development application, and I'll see the actual check. And so I will redact the check, like all of the address and the check numbers and all that other stuff, and then send it out. So I haven't seen that in a long time, but once or twice I've seen that happen. So normally what happens is if we do get a public records request, I will try and see if anything can be exempt, because there's usually a really good reason for something to be exempt. But on the other hand, if it's not exempt, gonna let it go, because the policy is towards disclosure, not towards retaining things. Next slide, please. So here's some common exemptions. They usually have to do with like safety issues. Like if, let's say somebody requests, I want all the emergency plans for any facility that might have like noxious gas releases, or any, places that store ammunition, emergency plans, or, where are your cameras? Like, where are the cameras located in these facilities? So those are related to safety, and we would not release something like that. We'd be very careful about releasing those things. Law enforcement, there are certain things like if there's an ongoing investigation, obviously if there's a public records request from the media and the investigation is ongoing, we don't need to release that until the investigation is finished. So that makes sense, right? Because we don't want to be in the middle of an investigation and Lamb and Week says, well, this is what we found out at Washington County, Sheriff's Office. This is what they're looking at. So that's another very good reason. So again, I just put a little blurb there about things that are often subject to litigation, and that would be the internal communications between public bodies. Also, if people are looking for communications with their attorney, with like LUT's attorney, it's not as obvious as I want all your communications with your attorney. That's not how it usually goes. You get all of the information, you retrieve all the information, and then you go through it. And there may be some discussions where the attorney has weighed in on something, and so you redact it and then you send it out, and then the requester comes back and says, I want to know what was redacted, like what was in there. And so that's where you get into the battle with, well, that's attorney-client privilege, and then they're like, prove it. So that's where we can get into a little bit more activity, I guess. Next. That's it. Short and sweet. Are there any questions? Okay. So just more applicable to folks here, if you're making notes. So I remember our last meeting, And I am not here to say what the process is going to be, but if you are writing things related to your work here, that is technically a public record because you are doing it in your capacity as a planning commissioner. It is about work that you are working on, and so it is a public record. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we'll move on to our second work session, draft planning work program.
Diami, did you want to come up or you just want to come up with questions? Good evening, Chair Mori Bidu and Commissioners. Teresa Cherniak, Community Planning Section Manager, and with me is Diami Valentine, Section Manager for Transportation Planning. We were here last month with a status report on our last work program, the 23-25 work program, and we gave a little preview of what we expect it to be in this coming biennium's work program, which starts in July. We wanted to return with just a little bit more detail on what we have now put into the draft that will be released for public comment starting on Friday. Oops. So reminder, land use and transportation's planning work is carried out by 3 teams. Community planning, which is my team, maintains and updates the land use elements of the county's comprehensive plan. That includes the community development code. Transportation planning, which is Diami's section, maintains and updates the transportation elements of the county's comprehensive plan, the transportation system plan primarily. And then development review and current planning. So they're the ones that do case files and reviewing actual development proposals on land, and they're implementing then the code and the plan documents that we work on. There's about 14 staff in community planning, 12 in transportation planning, and 12 in development review / current planning, and that includes the support staff as well. We also have GIS, Geographic Information System, and economic and demographic staff folded into there. Most of the work we do is mandated by state statute and subject to state rules. Since there are typically a lot more projects than staff to do them, we go through a work program exercise where we identify those major projects that we believe will be coming up in the next 2 years, and talk with the Planning Commission, with the board, with the community about those, ensure they are aligned with what the board does want us to work on. It includes a lot of mandatory tasks. It seems in the recent years have been getting more and more requirements handed to us from the state. You've seen them, the climate friendly and equitable communities. They couldn't have made that harder to say. All of that work with the parking changes we had to do, there will be more coming up. All the middle housing, there will be more housing related items coming up. So our work is less and less up to us, and more restricted, it feels like, by the state. So we do, through the work program, try to balance board and staff time, budget resources. We do a lot of ongoing non-discretionary things. And we do get community input. So we're trying to balance all of those things when we put together the draft work program. The themes that and this has 23-25, it should be 25-27 work program, are in alignment with board's priorities. They include housing production and affordability, natural resource and climate, multimodal transportation system planning and funding, planning code updates, and then we added one actually called fiscal responsibility. And there were a couple projects that we were working on where they didn't quite seem to fit in one of the other ones, but they were very important things we were looking at, and uh, determined that it was really about fiscal responsibility. So you'll see what those are as we talk through it. We talked some about this last time. A lot of what we do is non-discretionary. It's ongoing work. All the development review work that we do, plan amendments, transportation modeling, GIS mapping. We participate a lot with Metro and other cities at the state level on different planning efforts. We do planning commission support. We also support the Washington County Coordinating Committee, and there's someone else we support. But so various boards and committees. So the specific projects may change, but this is kind of our continuous work, kind of our meat and potatoes work. And then we have maybe our more major initiatives. So I'll focus then on those. Some of these, a lot of these are continuations from work we had been doing. Maybe it's just a later stage of the work. So in this, we continue to do a lot of work on the policy development and promotion side of things. And you will see counties do now have to develop housing needs analyses and housing production strategies. So we will be needing to be encouraging and helping promote more housing to be built. So we have started some of those efforts with middle housing and accessory dwelling units, where we're developing some materials that will help get the word out to property owners on the options there, and to help them think, oh, man, maybe I could do something like that. And then a lot of the policy development is about participating in rulemaking, reviewing legislation and commenting on it, that sort of thing. I mentioned housing capacity analysis and production strategies. We need to start, we aren't due for that adoption until 2029 and 2030, but we haven't done this before, and there are kind of preliminary studies that need to be done. So we will be starting some of that work. We'll have a set of housing code revisions that will come in advance of our overall community development code, things that we've identified already that need to be changed. Then Suzanne's going to talk about the community development code assessment. That's a long-term project. So that'll be the next work session. Rural accessory dwelling unit ordinance. We've heard a lot from rural community members that they would appreciate some more housing options to get a little bit more income, to have housing for family or farm workers or other folks that just want to live out there. So we are proposing to go forward with an ordinance on that, and then to look further at what the other rural housing options are that most of them are permissive in state law. They don't require us to do it, but they allow us to do things. So we'll look further at those, but we wanted to move forward the accessory dwelling unit. Little bit of work on the significant natural resources to update our program for the rural area. The last couple of years, we were focusing on the urban area, and we need to also update it for the rural area, and then bring back some potential changes to the inventory and kind of clean up of the code language we did last year. Climate friendly and equitable communities. There are some additional changes, additional land use changes, mostly about kind of pedestrian friendliness, walkability, that sort of thing. And then we also are required to adopt town center boundaries for those town centers that don't yet have a boundary, but they've been identified on Metro's 2040 plan. So in particular, Raleigh Hills, but we also will be looking at two others. And then the FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agencies, floodplain regulations that we got direction to do some what they're calling pre-implementation compliance measures in advance of their completing the kind of their environmental review on their permanent regulations. That's a little bit up in the air right now, and we have developed a briefing memo for the board, so we'll be talking with them, but we are working toward developing model ordinance language to adopt into the code. Transportation.
So not much of an additional update to what you heard from our briefing last time we met. But we have been continuing to scope our major update to our transportation system plan. And so this is could be an extensive effort. We are going to need to kind of right size it. This is primarily a locally funded effort. So just making sure we're keeping expectations right sized as well. We are looking for additional funding opportunity through state, through various grants. So we will, what is listed up here is a typical process and kind of an expectation from the state through the transportation planning rule. So we hope to check all of those off, but understanding we can only accomplish what we can accomplish with the available funding of it. We are supporting an update to the complete street design standards. So this is the county's road design and construction standards. We've done some policy work around that, and we're working with our engineering team to update the cross sections, make sure they better align with kind of best practices for more context sensitive designs. And then we're kind of midstream, and this will be wrapped up shortly after the biennium starts, our transportation safety action plan, which will help us, as I think we briefed you last time on. So don't need to focus too much on that. Next slide might be the extent of my contributions tonight.
So the urban growth boundary expansion and urban planning area agreement updates. Sherwood had a UGB expansion, and North Plains may continue with a relook. So if they do, definitely Sherwood, we do an ordinance that moves the land from the rural to the urban area and that sort of thing. And then we need to update our agreements with Cornelius. Definitely that one is from 1988, I believe still. And then if the North Plains relook does go forward, we would update that urban planning area agreement. One thing that we did add as just an ordinance rather than an issue paper is to move forward with the contractors establishment ordinance to look particularly at the requirements that we have in the future development 20-acre district. There have been issues with conflicts with city plans for an area, and that these uses aren't really turning out to be temporary, and they don't always fit with the city's desired future uses. There have also been a lot of neighbor conflicts with some of these. So we have some different standards and requirements in the rural area, and we probably would be looking at those and maybe making them a bit more similar, and addressing some of the concerns, possibly with looking at time limits or that sort of thing. And then minor TSP updates.
Yeah, just being consistent with incorporating elements from other cities and jurisdictions as changes are made. Beaverton is in the process of updating their transportation system plan. Tualatin has updated their TSP. So knowing that we just want to make sure our plan is as up to date as possible, we may encounter the need to update our TSP periodically.
And then finally and then we have some minor comprehensive plan amendments. So we often find things that need to be tweaked in our code that don't necessarily rise to their own ordinance, but so we do a sort of an omnibus. And then finally, the fiscal responsibility category. I think we mentioned this last time. We have an urban services framework project going on right now. It's a 2-year limited duration, looking at the financial and practical considerations of providing urban services to urban unincorporated Washington County. And we have a long list of those urban services. Mostly they're infrastructure related. So sewer, water, fire, parks, that sort of thing. And we have, we're working together with Beaverton and with Tigard on that. There are a lot of areas that are kind of islands within city areas, and there are challenges with serving those areas. And so just looking at a kind of long-term, what are the implications of that, and exploring possible strategies. So it's really at this point a technical exercise, and it'll come up with findings. So it's not necessarily even going to have recommendations, but it'll be a lot of food for thought and a lot of discussion with the board and with the city councils of those 2 cities. And then finally, assessment of the interim park system development charge program. This is a system development charge, I think I mentioned also last time, that is within the ultimate service area of THPRD, Tualatin Hills Park and Recreation District, but on properties that aren't yet within the district. And we have an agreement, but it's the fee right now is significantly lower than what the district charges. And so we would be looking at that and possible changes to bring that up to par. So next steps, we do have an online open house that starts this Friday. It'll be open until May 30th. And the questions really are somewhat broad, and since we, in a lot of cases, don't have a lot of discretion on whether we do these things or not, and we are limited in staff. We don't have a lot of capacity to do other things. So really it's asking for people's feedback on what is in there, and is there anything else that they feel is missing, but kind of given the constraints that we have, kind of an understanding that we may or may not be able to do anything more as a result, but we do want to still hear people's impressions. So we wanted to bring this to the Planning Commission. I know you don't have we will have tables available that, as we've done in the past, with more description. We're happy to come back to the Planning Commission or to get individual Planning Commissioner feedback on that. We will, at the next Planning Commission meeting we expect to have, which is May 21st, 2 work program tasks we'll have a further discussion on. So the rural ADUs and the CDC assessment is, I think it is. So Raleigh Hills will be next time. CDC assessment will be tonight. And we will be attending the Committee for Community Involvement meeting in May. I am already scheduled for that, and any other meetings that were requested to attend. So sometimes CPOs want us to come out, community participation organizations, and we do that as requested. And then we would take all of that feedback and make any changes, and then ask the board to adopt it July 15th. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much. Do commissioners have any questions?
I guess my one question would be, when you bring the final work program to the board for adoption, and this is just my ignorance on not having been here, do we do like a first reading and then we discuss, then it goes back for draft, or do you present it, we discuss it, we vote on it that night? How does that work?
So the way we've done it in past years, we've actually had the draft table that we would bring to the board, and they would provide feedback, and then we would and they would authorize us to send that out. And then we would get the comments, make changes, and then at the board meeting, we would just ask them to adopt it with changes, but we would explain what the changes were. It's not an ordinance, so we don't need first or second readings or anything like that. This time, given the timing of when we could get to the board, we weren't ready with the table, so we just talked more generally with what we expected to be in the draft. They gave us a little bit of feedback at that meeting, so we made a couple of changes from what we had expected to put in there. But they haven't seen this yet. So then we'll do the same kind of thing. We'll get the feedback from everyone. We'll make some recommended changes, and then we'll go talk to the board about that. If they're okay with our changes, they would adopt it on that day. If they're like, no, we want you to do something else or modify this, then we could go back and change. But typically, they'll go ahead and adopt.
Commissioner or Vice Chair Monteblanco.
Thank you so much. Super excited about an urban services framework. I look forward to reading that. Can you go back to slide 9? Because there's just vocabulary there that I don't know. The urban, sorry, read notes. Urban planning area agreement. I don't know what that is. And then a contractor's establishment. Can you give a very quick summary, or just email me?
Sure. Yeah. So the urban planning area agreements are, they are actually part of the comprehensive plan. They get adopted by ordinance. They are agreements that the county has with all of the cities within the county, and they talk about how we will coordinate planning. So we agree on the area that ultimately the city would expect to have become part of the city. And that's their area of interest. And then as we have development applications within that area, we will send them notice. As we do planning projects within the area that, as either of us do, we will let each other know, and we agree to have each other participate in those efforts. And we give them the authority to plan for their new urban reserve areas. So without us giving them that authority, it's only the county that has the authority because it's our jurisdiction. But since we are saying ultimately this will be your area, we allow them then to do that planning. So it's that kind of thing. Sometimes there are specific agreements about roadways and roadway jurisdiction and what will happen. There are agreements on who will do the urban services planning. So it's an agreement about how we plan together.
That's super helpful. Thank you. And the contractor's establishment?
Do you want to talk about that one, Carol?
Sure, yeah. So the contractors' establishments are those kinds of uses. They were intended to be kind of a temporary transitional use in this FD20 zoning. There are things like landscaping yards, like sand and gravel, other kind of construction materials, activities that don't require a significant investment in terms of actually building structures. A lot of the attractiveness of these certain areas is their proximity to like I-5. And that's what we're finding is that they're really prime locations because they're so central and to great access. And so they're staying around much longer. And because they have that kind of open industrial nature, some of the cities don't see that as being consistent with their long-term plans for the area. And so, and then there was also an inconsistency in terms of some of the standards that apply to contractors' yards in the rural areas versus the FD20 zone. And so that was the reason for bringing this forward, looking at making them more consistent, but also kind of going back and looking at the policy around this district and the uses and looking at potentially putting some duration time limits on how long the use can exist.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much.
Other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this time, we will move on to our third work session, Community Development Code Assessment Project.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Suzanne Savin. I'm a senior planner with community planning, and I'm looking forward to talking about this project that we're just starting that's going to last for about 15 months, Community Development Code Assessment. And first, I want to provide a little bit of context by talking about what is the Community Development Code, because I'm not sure everyone listening to this has had experience with this document yet, but it's one of the documents that makes up our comprehensive plan. We have several documents that make up the comprehensive plan, Community Development Code, or CDC as we call it, the Rural Natural Resource Plan and the community plans. Teresa just mentioned the urban planning area agreements, and we have the comprehensive framework plan for the urban area. So we have several documents. CDC is probably the thickest of the documents that we have. And it contains standards that regulate both urban and rural development in the unincorporated area. And it also works hand in hand with some of the other comprehensive plan elements like the land use district maps and the significant natural resource maps that are in the urban community plans and the rural natural resource plan are pretty much directly related to the regulations for both land uses and significant natural resources that are in the Community Development Code. And so that brings us to what kinds of information is in the Community Development Code. So it's got the procedures that apply to different types of development. It describes all of the land use districts in the county, and it lists all the allowed land uses in each of those districts. It also has development standards. So examples here are landscape design, grading and drainage, lighting, floodplains, and significant natural resources are some ones that are pretty common. And then it also has a very thick section on special use standards. So these are standards that apply to very specific types of uses. So we've got some special use standards that apply to accessory dwelling units, campgrounds, food cart pods, group care, and many others. I think there's probably at least 100 different special uses that have standards in our code. The CDC also has standards for road access and sidewalks and land divisions and property line adjustments, and also for public transportation facilities. So kind of brings us to why we felt like there needed to be an assessment. The Community Development Code was adopted in 1983. And over time, we've made some targeted additions to the code, and we've also made a few subtractions, but the additions to the code have well outpaced any subtractions that we've made. So while we've been adding to the code, we've never comprehensively reviewed it since it was adopted in 1983, and it's become a very large and unwieldy document. So it's about 1,200 pages now, and one of our other staff members brought a food scale in, and we weighed it, and it's now at 6 pounds. I think it might even be a little bit over 6 pounds now. It also has some content issues because it was developed before the requirements that have come out in the last like 10 years or so that require clear and objective standards. It was developed way before that. So it's another reason that it needs to be comprehensively looked at. And we've had this on our work program to do a CDC assessment for several years, but we knew that we would need consultant assistance to do such a big look and a big task, and we had to find funding to be able to do that. So we somewhat recently received a grant from the Department of Land Conservation and Development in the amount of $146,000 that will be primarily used to fund the consultant help for doing this work. And so the DLCD project, the scope of that is to identify inconsistent, outdated, and repetitive standards and standards that are not clear and objective, particularly as they affect housing. We'll also be looking at equity considerations and best practices and where changes to the CDC are needed to comply with state housing statutes and reduce regulatory barriers to housing and facilitate, make the CDC easier to use for both the public, developers, and staff overall, and make sure it's consistent with all the different layers of governmental requirements. So the CDC assessment is that we're doing is basically the first phase of a larger program that we think is going to be a multi-year program to comprehensively update the code. Our consultant is Cascadia Partners, and this first phase, the CDC assessment, is going to result in 2 publications. One of them is going to be CDC assessment itself, which is basically going to be a document that that identifies issues and problems with the CDC and also provides some high-level recommendations for how those issues could be addressed. And then the other document that's going to come out of this is going to be a document that will look at how these changes that are recommended through the CDC assessment, how they should be prioritized and what order should they be tackled. And then later there will be a subsequent phase 2 where we will actually develop some code concepts or draft code language for actual changes to the code. So this timeline, I'm going to talk a little bit about what each of these colored boxes, each of them involves. So that first step 1, which is the green box, stakeholder interviews. In the next couple of months, our consultant is going to hold virtual focus group interviews with small groups of stakeholders that work with the Community Development Code. And so these will include developers and home builders, community members, housing advocacy representatives, service district representatives, building services and engineering staff, and then planning staff. And these groups are still being finalized right now. We don't have final groups, but we're working on that right now. Concurrent with this first step, with the stakeholder interviews, we're going to create and post a county webpage about this project. And that webpage is going to have a project overview, and it'll show basically probably this timeline with some descriptors. It'll have frequently answered questions, and we'll have a sort of a form built into that web page so that if people have questions or comments, they can submit a form about the project through the web page. Steps 2 and 3, the light blue and the darker blue boxes, these are the steps that are going to take the largest part of the project timeline, because this is where the consultant is going to do their technical assessment of the Community Development Code. They're going to first produce a draft of the CDC assessment, and that will be reviewed by staff and the technical advisory committee, and the planning commission will have an opportunity to look at that too. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then the consultants are going to finalize that report. And step 4 is is more technical work, where the consultant's going to draft the CDC amendments priorities report, basically giving us recommendations about what order we should move forward with various recommended changes. So step 5 is going to be a public open house. And that public open house would be sharing the findings from the CDC assessment and summary report and the CDC amendments priorities report, and getting input from the public on what they think about those findings. And in addition to this public open house, and in addition to the public comment form that we will have on the web page for the project, we've also been talking with our consultants about other ways for the public to provide input into this project. One option would be for staff to go to provide briefings at the various individual citizen community participation organizations. So that's one option And we recognize that most members of the community are not like power users of the community development code, but there are a lot of them that have opinions on certain chapters and certain sections of the code because they've had experience reviewing development projects. And so we want to make sure that we get that input. I want to mention step 6, which is after the open house. So this is where the consultant would make final revisions to the CDC amendments priorities report in response to feedback that's been received up to that point. So it would be feedback received at the open house and feedback received from the Planning Commission. And again, I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides. And also feedback received from our technical advisory committee, and I'm about to talk about that next. So this project, we're proposing that it have a technical advisory committee. This would be a committee of individuals that have particular technical knowledge to round out staff's knowledge and to make sure that we include perspectives that staff may not have on development. So we would like to have one planning commissioner be a member of the TAC, and other representatives would include a market rate developer, an affordable housing developer, a representative from Clean Water Services, Metro representative. We'd have a traffic and road engineering staff member, housing advocacy representative. We'd have a community member, a representative of the Department of Land Conservation and Development, a current planning staff member, and then we also wanted there to be a member from a city. We wanted to get another planning section's perspective on our code. So the TAC is going to meet virtually 4 times over the course of the project. So the first meeting would be in summer 2025. So we're still working on calendaring, but these will give you some approximations. And at that first meeting, the TAC would be looking at providing input on what they see as the issues with the community development code. And they'd also provide input and review drafts that the consultant has produced by that time. In the fall, the TAC will be reviewing barriers to housing and equity issues. In the winter, they'll be reviewing the draft CDC assessment report. And in spring 2026, they'll be reviewing and receiving feedback on the draft CDC priorities report before that report is presented to the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners. So these are some things that we are hoping to have as discussion sort of following this last slide is whether any members of the Planning Commission have any initial comments or questions about this project. We'd also appreciate having there be a selection of a planning commissioner to serve on this technical advisory committee. And we do want to know what the PC's thoughts are on how to be involved as the project moves forward. We do have 2 planning commission work sessions with our consultant planned. So one of those is going to be fall or winter 2025, and that work session will discuss the draft CDC assessment summary report with the Planning Commission. And then in spring 2026, we'd come back to the Planning Commission again with the consultant to discuss the draft CDC amendments priorities report. And so one question is that staff has is, would the Planning Commission like to have additional work session reports from staff and the Planning Commission's TAC representative at maybe other key points than these 2 work sessions that we know we're going to have? So that's that concludes my presentation. Just opening it up for questions, and I already see a couple of questions. It looks like Commissioner Rosenberry and Commissioner Monteblanco both have questions.
Go ahead, Commissioner Rosenberry. Oh, you're on mute.
Hi, I just wanted to clarify, what the planning commissioner's role, what you specifically need from one of us on this advisory committee.
I think we would want your perspective on the information that's being presented to you. We'd want the planning commission's perspective on what do you think about the consultant's draft? What do you think about what the consultant has identified as the community development code problems? What do you have some thoughts on their sort of higher level recommendations on how those might be addressed? So we're looking for your perspectives on that at the meeting itself, and then I think we also would want the planning commissioner to be a conduit back to the planning commission on what they've heard as they've participated in the TAC. And Teresa might have some other thoughts.
No, that's exactly what I was going to
Okay.
say, the conduit part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that we would expect this person to represent all the views of all of the planning commissioners because you won't know what those are. So you would be bringing your knowledge or perspective on the code items that were being brought up. And if you were knowledgeable of if the PC had taken any positions on other things, you could bring that and or just bring it back to the planning commission. And we again could have some other key points where staff and the TAC member could talk with the broader planning commission about what items might have been brought up and things you think should be brought back to the TAC.
Commissioner Monteblanco, or sorry, Vice Chair Monteblanco.
Thanks. This is exciting. And a 6-pound document is overwhelming and not terribly accessible. So I think in terms of work sessions, and maybe this is just a really long email, but I would like some sort of grounding in this document and how the people are interacting with it. Like I was just playing for a second online with what I think is the online system according to Google. And I'm sure there's plenty of critiques and pros to that. But I think for me, I'd love to hear like, gosh, what's the most common chapter that's commented on? What is, I don't know. I just, I don't know that I can read 1,200 pages in the next few months. I'm all for a challenge. But yeah, I guess just some sort of grounding would be helpful to me in this document that no doubt is shaping my life, but I don't have a direct relationship with it yet.
Thank you.
Commissioner Carlson?
So I had a couple questions. One is out of idle curiosity. How did the consultant get selected, and have they done similar work like this? Shall we say, recrafting a modern document for other cities? Because consultants can be good or consultants can be less than helpful. So
Right.
I'd be curious to hear about that first.
Yeah. They are, I can tell you, I'll answer the second question first. They do have experience with this type of work, and they're actually doing some of this work now with some other jurisdictions, like Hillsborough, for example, is going through this, and they're helping Hillsborough with theirs. How they got selected is a little more of an involved discussion. And I don't know, Teresa, should I give the whole spiel about that?
Just the end part of
Okay,
it.
I think sort of the end of it was that we advertised for a consultant. We had an RFP out. We got minimal sort of participation from that RFP. And one of the reasons we found that had happened is that the Department of Land Conservation and Development has many consultants right now working for them on the projects they're doing. And some of those consultants were the ones that were most knowledgeable about this type of work. So we had already gotten the grant from DLCD to hire the consultant, did the RFP, weren't able to find sort of a match, went back to DLCD and said, hey, we're kind of stuck because, you guys have all the consultants now under your project. So DLCD sort of acknowledged that, and they said that they would basically have one of the firms that is consulting with them, sort of do a contract with us. So I don't know how to. You can maybe explain it a little better, Teresa.
Yeah,
Complicated.
so they do have three firms kind of on call, or there are three approved firms that that do code work. And this is one of those three firms. They're very well respected in the region. They just released the guidelines for the climate friendly and equitable communities. Um, Pedestrian oriented design work. So they do have a lot of experience in this, and we did wait a little while in order to get them on contract. So we've been, I think, really pleased with them so far. And their questions and their knowledge of process and all of that.
Okay, thank you for that. My other question, in looking at your technical advisory committee, it looks like you've hit a lot of the important stakeholders there. I would just put a call out for, I see Clean Water Services represented. Perhaps you need some energy folk because whatever is done there will definitely affect how both large energy providers will be regulated. So my plea would be to include them, bring them in. They want to come.
And we have looked at a wide variety of folks and who maybe to be on the technical advisory committee versus someone that we interview or bring in different ways, either on the focus groups or interviews or that sort of thing. So I think we can definitely bring that to our consultant team and get their perspective on.
And maybe a
where to
focus
put
group would be more appropriate for that, but a lot of times they're an afterthought and that can cause trouble.
Commissioner Just.
My interest is in the community member of the TAC, what qualifications you're looking for, and how that person's being recruited, if they're being recruited.
We have asked one of the community members who's the vice chair of one of the CPOs to be on the TAC, and that individual has participated in probably every single planning project or ordinance we've ever had ever since I've been here, and I've been here since 2010. And that individual has also probably reviewed every single development application that has come through their CPO. So they are what we'd consider a power user. And this individual also is someone that if there has been any mistake that we've made in an ordinance, this individual always finds that. So we feel very, very strongly that this person is like, from the community standpoint, this person is like a power user of the CDC.
Commissioner Rosenberry.
Along the same lines, I just wanted to recommend that the telecoms be consulted at some point. We live in such a digital era, and if we aren't providing the high-speed cable, the high-speed internet, the county's going to be impacted.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I guess I really think that this is going to be the seminal work going forward of the county. So I think as much feedback as we can hear about the process, so we can, there's nothing worse than something going along for 2/3 of a year or 3/4 of a year, and then it's brought to a group that's supposed to have some sort of say over it or provide feedback, and we look at it and say, wow, this is so on the wrong track. So, I'd rather have incremental check-ins. So we, if we feel like something's going, areas are not being explored or something is not trending the way that might be practical, that would be good.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. I think from what I heard from commissioners, I think are in agreement that it would be helpful to get a little bit more background information on the engagement that would be required for the TAC. So probably would be a good idea to revisit that request for a commissioner who's volunteering to do that. Commissioner Rosenberry.
Yes, it would be nice to have more information, but since I use these documents from county to county on different projects, if we're looking for a volunteer, I'd be happy to.
Other commissioners, do you want more information, or would you like to nominate Commissioner Rosenberry to be the representative for us?
I would just say, Commissioner Rosenberry, prepare for some emails.
Emails. Yeah, they're public records thing. And meetings, public meetings, all that other, so yeah, don't everybody all get in a big old meeting and start discussing.
Individual emails or
Well,
no email chains?
Well, that's a public meeting, but it still could be a public record.
yes, so,
Or phone conversations. We'll have lots of phone conversations.
Okay. So is everyone, are we quiet because we're okay? I am totally fine with Commissioner Rosenberry representing the Planning Commission. Are others?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for volunteering. I'm happy that you are stepping up.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll be reaching back out as we're working on scheduling those TAC meetings to make sure that it matches everybody's calendars.
Well, I think just to the question or request for kind of an orientation, we can, start out with a table of contents and do kind of a quick FAQ about how to navigate the CDC as somebody new to the county. I've also been kind of diving in and I'm sure staff that have been using the code for a long time, the public also have a lot of frustrations dealing with it. But just in terms of how it, and this is where the consultant's really going to provide some great feedback, is how it compares with other jurisdictions. There's just some basic fundamentals in terms of how the ordinance is constructed, in terms of use tables, the way procedures are described and things like that, just that could make a huge improvement to the code. So, but I think giving you that orientation, this is how you would approach the code from a user's, a new user's perspective. We can do that in a pretty brief manner, hopefully at the next meeting. And because whoever's going to be Commissioner Rosenberry being our representative, you might need to have that information sooner rather than later.
And just to follow up on the public records discussion in association with what we're talking about, would it be a good practice to maybe copy one of the staff in order to keep the public records, Washington County
public meetings straight? Yeah, that's really a really excellent idea. Is to always copy somebody at the staff so that we have a record of it. And also, like, an excellent point about the public records retention, right? Because we have ways to retain our emails, so you don't have to worry about retaining them. We automatically do it. So,
thank you. So whomever would like to on staff, let us know. Okay, we should email. We should copy Todd. Commissioner Carlson.
Provided I can remember it at this point in time. With the technical advisory team, are you the folks that are doing that? What is the selection process for that? How is that being advertised? I was kind of curious about that.
We started out by figuring sort of what categories of technical advisors that we needed, and then we reached out to basically the higher level management for those. Like, for example, for clean water services, we reached out initially to Damon Reishi, and I actually don't remember what his title is right off the top of my head, but we asked him who he would recommend to be on the TAC on behalf of Clean Water Services, and he recommended her last name just changed. I think it's Orlean now. She's one of the engineers with Clean Water Services, but she works a lot with the interface between their requirements and our community development codes. So he felt like that made sense. So we basically relied on sort of the upper level staff at the various categories to tell us who they recommended. We're still waiting for to get some recommendations. So for example, we have we know we want as a county, one of the county staff people we want to have on the TAC is a representative from our traffic and road engineering section, because their road design standards also interface with our community development code. So we've reached out to the county engineer and asked him, you know, of your staff, here's what the project is. The TAC will have 4 virtual meetings, and we're amending the community, or we're looking at how the community development code might be changed. Of your staff, who would you recommend to be on the TAC? And he's sort of pondering that and talking with his staff about that. And so we're waiting to kind of hear what the decision is. So that's sort of how we've approached it.
If I can, if I can add just a little bit. So just to be clear, the TAC is advisory to staff. So there's not like a formal role. They won't be making a recommendation to the board or anything. So it's not an appointed by the board or anything. This is a staff level advisory committee. For the builder folks that we are doing the say the facilitations, but the like stakeholder interviews with, we did contact the Home Building Association. We talked with Matt Wellner, who often has represented the Home Building Association. And there was, at the point we were reaching out, they had lost their government relations person. So we were reaching out within the groups that we knew and the people that then were recommended by him and others. And I believe he will be the builder representative on the.
Right, he'll be the market rate developer representative on the TAC.
And then for the affordable housing developer, we did reach out to our community development department and our housing office to get recommendations for a nonprofit builder. We also are reaching out to Vienna Star, so want to bring in a range of perspectives there.
And last question, I promise I'm not going to beat this horse too much more. I'm really pleased to hear that this firm has had work done with other state level agencies, because I do think, especially in this session with the governor's housing bill and that sort of thing, a lot of things may change come, July 1st or January 1st. So they're being really thoughtful about not only what's happening right now this session, but plans from the governor and all that kind of thing. Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, actually originally the grant was from DLCD. It's now with the Housing and Production Office. And they were very clear that and they are running the contracting, and they were very clear in that they wanted the consultants to look at not only what's already on the books, but whatever may be past this session, since it spans the time that we'll be working on the project, and there could be some big changes.
Okay. If there are no further questions or comments, I think we will move on to consideration of minutes. Thank you for your presentation. So we have one set of minutes to approve. It's the minutes from March 19th. Do commissioners have any corrections or comments on them? Seeing none and without objection, the minutes for March 19th, 2025 are accepted as submitted. Next on the agenda is Planning Commission announcements. Does any commissioner have something they'd like to share? Okay. Well, next on the agenda is adjournment. So without objection, we are adjourned.
Thank you.